Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Train Crash podcast. Here with Oliver Rowley and Luke Noble, we'll be talking about rivet counters and whether they're a good thing or a bad thing to the hobby. Obviously, we've seen a couple of YouTube videos coming out recently about them, a couple of online articles, sort of things on RM Web and the like, about the topic, and I thought we have a slightly different take on a lot of things to many people in the hobby, so I thought it would be a good podcast to make. So, Luke, do you want to define what we are using as a rivet counter?
Yes. So before we get started, we just want to say that a rivet counter, we can divide them up into two categories. It's really important to know the differences between them, in our opinion. So you have one type of rivet counter, which is just a modeler that is interested in the accuracy of rowing models and trying to make them as prototypical and realistic as they possibly can. And you have kind of the others, which are like more obsessive modelers. They're kind of fixated on it being right and everyone following that kind of rule that everything should be accurate and realistic and prototypical and whatnot. So that's the way we've kind of defined it. So two major different types.
So obviously that being the definition that we're using, you may have a slightly different opinion listening at home, but obviously it's the one that we're using for the discussion in this video and hopefully in the discussion in the comments section. So let's start off with that first group, the group that are more interested in realism, the side of modelling where running numbers and things have taken into serious account, weathering as well, weathering in a prototypical manner. Do you think those are a good thing or a bad thing?
I think they're a really good thing. I'd say if you kind of follow my modelling journey, I've kind of transitioned into this I'm trying to kind of transitioning to this bottom group of rivet counters here, this kind of the accurate modelers group. And for me, I find it something that I'm really enjoying. So I have renumbered locos, I have weathered all my stock, I have done all that kind of stuff. And for me, it's just kind of what I want to see. I do work off a lot of prototypical pictures as well. And I think the key factor, a really important thing in this group is that they're not really critical of any other people. They don't enforce their views. They may share their stuff on social media and say, I've hand-built trout work here to replicate this realistically. So for me, I think they're definitely a force for good. I think it's nice to have a range of interests in the prototype, in the hobby. And I think it just, at the end of the day, it's likely that a lot of us will maybe look into the history books at some point, to think about something in the hobby. And so we need these people to, write these books, write these magazine articles and stuff like that and provide the inspiration for it. So I definitely think they're a good force for the hobby, and I've kind of trailing off on my point there a bit.
I think that it's, as you said, I think prototypical weathering. You didn't really mention it, but I think it kind of leads on from your point. With the likes of the 21s, 22 and 29s, where they had quite prototypical streaking downstream parts of the locomotive, I think that just shows an extra level of eye for detail that a lot of modelers do have. But I think because obviously you're classing yourself within this category. Your packet shunter was an ex-leather stone one.
There's the Lyle Shaw black packet, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, you get the most. You just describe what it is.
It's just the packet in plain black. There was no numbering, no branding. There's a maker's plate on it, printed on with a Tampo printer. But apart from that, it was plain black.
What have you done to it?
So I've weathered it. I've fitted fictional nameplates. It's called Douglas. High capacity stay alive, new pickups, and a crew, and as well as like a BR lamp on the running board. So for me, it's I've got a Scottish distillery layout. Peckett's never ran distilleries, but through imagining history and product time, taking more steps to look into the prototype and draw inspiration from that. So now I've got Andrew Barclay and Weston, but I kind of see it as a step forward rather than this is the most accurate model I can make.
Yeah, I think I was bringing that up because obviously you haven't picked a specific locomotive you've based it on. Another good example of that rather is Renford, which is a massive northeastern layout. It models P2s as if Gresley rather, if Thompson rebuilds hadn't taken place. So they still had the A4 front valances and things like that. So that kind of giving an impression of modelling rather than exact prototype as such. I think that kind of falls again into that category. We've obviously got renumbering, which you mentioned earlier, to make things typical for your area that people are modelling or whatever. But it kind of does allow for that area of imagination as such. I personally use it quite a lot. Obviously, running a collieries did end up with all sorts. So I've kind of got a get out of jail free card there, if I was to be completely accurate. But I think, yes, all in all, that is a good side of the this part of Rivet counters. Do you think there's anything bad that could be associated with this subsection?
And I guess if you kind of say you're a Rivet counter, you straight away fall into negative stigma and potential exclusion from, I don't know, maybe online forums and groups and stuff like that. If you got a bit of reputation for being a stickler for the prototype yourself, people may be less inviting or less encouraging when you post on other people's layouts or workbench feeds or whatever they're doing. So I really don't think there's much negative about the actual modelers, definitely about the stigma around it and that kind of stuff, but not really. I struggle to find a negative if they're not being critical of anyone directly and they're just kind of keeping themselves to themselves, or offering helpful advice, because that's something definitely that's true. I've had people ask me about my inspiration and my layouts, and I've been able to give them a research folder that I've essentially put together, basically a couple of big online galleries of pictures. And so I guess they can definitely be a force in that sense as well. But for me, no, I can't really think of any negatives.
I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's the encouragement. If somebody is looking for prototypical modelling, then obviously this sort of Rivet counter who is interested in the prototype and creating a representation of real life would obviously become in particular useful. You mentioned it. RM Web is brilliant for it. I've seen a lot of, especially younger modelers who maybe didn't experience a time in history, have a lot of help from those who have those prototype images and things that will help them develop if they are wanting a completely realistic layout. I think there's a line between encouragement and putting somebody down. Obviously, that is all in the wording and the way that somebody comes across. Obviously, it's slightly different online. In person as well is slightly different than online. But yeah, that's the only conceivable bad thing that I can think of off the top of my head. I think it all comes down to the wording of it, I think, and what the actual modeler wants from it. So if safe advice is being given to a modeler who's not interested in realism, then it's going to come across wrong. But if it's a modeler like you who's very interested in creating the prototype, or at least a representation of the prototype, then it will come in handy.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, too often I think I see on Facebook people posting, it's common, I'm in far too many Facebook development groups, my feed is just absolutely jam-packed with them, but I often see questions about people asking, what's the best track to use? And I like just to scroll through the comments just to see what people are saying and what people are suggesting. And far too often, I feel like I'm just seeing comments saying, build your own track, it looks better and it runs better. But chances are, if you're asking the question, what's the best track, you're in the hobby for not very long at all. I can remember a time when I was thinking, I didn't use Facebook at that point, or was asking all those questions online, thinking, what's the best track to use? And if someone had told me to hand build track, I would have been completely, I just wouldn't have been able to cope with it at all. I just would have think it's impossible. It's something that super skilled modelers do. And maybe that's them trying, I guess a negative could be trying to force their views on other people, or believing that they're superior, so everyone should follow their ways. I guess that's the only negative criticism, but then it's impossible to judge the people online if they're Rivet counters or just keyboard warriors, or people that have got far too much time to build track by hand, one sleeper by sleeper, rail chair by rail chair, whatever. I'm not being critical of hand building tracks, something I really want to get into, but just that kind of commenting online,
I think that is obviously, I think that kind of strays more into the other group that are like hyper obsessed almost with realism. It's obviously pitching, and I think that is an issue within the hobby, especially on the likes of Facebook, where there's groups that are set up for novices, but it's clear to see that there isn't novices in there. There's a lot of older modelers who are more experienced, and sometimes the ideas that they pitch are completely wrong for a newbie to the hobby. But then again, you are seeing the emergence of more advanced modeler Facebook groups. I'm not quite keen on the way they set themselves up. They quite often are done by invite, which I don't think is very inclusive, especially considering we're trying to grow the hobby beyond people just train set modelling. So I think that's maybe a subject for a different time. But that kind of hyper-obsessed with realism, obviously, do you think they bring much good into the hobby?
So, are we moving on to the kind of the second section?
Yeah.
So, I can see it being. You can interpret it as you like. You can see the good bits, not the bad bits, or you can just see the bad bits, not the good bits. I think I don't mind them as long as they're not critical of other modelers. So I quite like seeing layouts that are accurate, but if they're too accurate, they're boring. If you get what I mean. It's nice if at the exhibition. Sometimes the layouts that are most accurate don't draw the biggest crowds. Because they could often have, the operator may have a stiff upper lip and decide to run trains to a timetable and stuff like that. It's something I've thought about doing, but I never got around to doing because I don't have a station anymore. Goodbye, Finn Larrick. So, do you know what? I think they're all right for the hobby as long as they don't force their views on. And what we see is they're often the people that have may had railway experience themselves, or may have just kind of transitioned to that super realistic stage. But then I sometimes think when I look at the realism of a layout, I think when you model something so, this is a kind of about layouts, when you model something so accurately, you sometimes lose, you can lose the overall impression of the layout. If your layout is following the track plan exactly, typically you need a lot of room. And so you spread everything out, and everything just kind of, the impression of that area becomes less concentrated and it's more difficult to recognise sometimes. If that kind of makes any sense.
I think it does, yeah. I think you're building towards, obviously, that clash between experienced modelers and not so experienced modelers can sometimes cause it. One thing that I will say about hyper-realistic layouts is obviously that I think they're fantastic to see, but again, I don't think they draw crowds. I mean, that Remford P2, which was still in the Gresley style, even though it was set in the BR days when the Thompson rebuilds would have happened. I think that was done because it's aesthetically a lot nicer as a P2 with the A4 style front on it than the Thompson rebuild. And that's kind of where, because Renford's EM layout, I think, it's massive, it's prototypical to a T. When those kind of little things slip in, they kind of just look a bit nicer, can sometimes make the layout a little bit more appealing. And I think, but my personal opinions is, kind of building from what you were saying, really, as long as they don't really get too critical of other modelers or critical at all, really, because criticism within the hobby is a difficult one. We might come on to that a little bit later. But obviously, each their own, and that's the amazing thing about this hobby. You can model to whatever standard, whatever thesis almost that you like. And if hyperrealism is your thing, then hyperrealism will be your thing. But it's obviously finding that path where you can implement what you want well, rather than just coming across as a bit of an arse to people.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I've ever had any negative experience from a Rivet counter or someone like that. And I don't think I ever have. I upload all my layouts builds fully on our own web. And I do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, to show people how I model. Second of all, just to exhibitions and stuff like that. And thirdly, to get advice, mostly. And I remember I was doing the point rodding on Distillery Yard. I'd never done point rodding before. Couldn't find any pictures really of online. Well, I could, but it's kind of not the stuff I was looking for. And I had used the wrong point rodding sections. So when you've got like the rodding between the point and the lever frame, and that's pretty much standard. But the way that the rodding goes onto the point and then changes the point, I'd done that wrong, and someone corrected me, and I'm very grateful that they did that for me. They did it in quite a kind, considerate, educating way, but not patronising me at all. So I don't think I've ever had negative Rivet counter experience. If any, I had positive. I'm not sure what category I'd place that person in, if they were like extreme or kind of not as extreme. But
The
yeah,
categories are quite fluid, aren't they? The
they are,
categories are quite fluid. But yeah, it comes back to it's that constructive side of it, and whether it's constructive criticism or whether it's just constructive advice. That appears to be what you've had a lot of experience with. And on the likes of Facebook or in web, those are the people who have the best impact on other modelers, is the constructive ideas, the constructive feedback on the modelling. And I think that's what people want when they are posting things on like a Facebook and or on web asking for opinions. They're asking for constructive feedback. If it just comes across as criticism, then it's very likely they'll lose interest, because let's face it, no one likes being told anything nice.
I have had negative criticism from Rivet counters before, actually. I just remembering that. And it kicked off a big argument on web. I can't believe I forgot about this. So I built, for you, it was in the end, a really small 4.5 inch radius piece of track work for running Rustons and Peckets on. I'm trying to find the Iron Web thing on my iPad now. And basically, what it was is I posted it and I said, look what the Ruston can do. I can't believe you can get around this tight track work. Obviously, the focus be on the track work, not the Ruston. And it got a lot of negative backlash. I was like, whoa, steady on. I was just trying to show you what the Ruston can do. I wasn't trying to offend anyone by building some super tight radius track work. And people were critical of it. And they said, this is so stupid. Why would you want to build something so small? And I kind of said, this is a proof of concept, not a fine scale P4 layout. And then other people got involved. There's no, I'm pretty sure people were just getting a bit, I don't know, annoyed, I guess. But people never messaged me personally and said, you're wrong. You're, a really bad modeler. You don't know how to build a realistic looking layout. Because to be honest with you, that criticism is just unnecessary no matter what hobby you're in.
I'd argue that those people who were kind of picking fun went, clearly that tiny radius track, some of which has found its way onto my channel. You should definitely go and look at it. It's the world's smallest micro layout build video.
Oh,
go watch it.
Wow, still a clickbait there.
But no, it's clear to see that is just proof of concept and just a little bit of fun. And at the end of the day, what is the hobby bar than to have some fun? But to have those sort of people like saying, "Oh, it's not correct," it's obvious that it's not correct, but then I think you get those sort of people in any hobby, whether that be model railways, model planes, RC planes, RC boats, whatever. You will always have people who are out to just be a bit of an arse, really, and I think that kind of you can't avoid that, unfortunately. And I think that's where a lot of the bad rep for Rivet counters comes from, is those few people who are just not very nice people, full stop. And it kind of almost tarnishes the name, almost. And everybody does this voice when they're pretending to be a Rivet counter. I don't quite know why, but yeah. But like everybody does that kind of voice for it, and it's just like a poking fun thing, isn't it? Within the hobby, it's easy to go, "Oh, the Rivet counters won't like that." When actually, I suppose you're after sort of like a subsection of those Rivet counters, those kind of people who aren't nice.
It's a minority, and I don't know even if we should kind of class them as Rivet counters, or we're using Rivet counters as a scapegoat, potentially for people that may have a different opinion or not. It's good questions to ask, I think.
Let us know in the comment section below what you think.
Because we don't want, you don't want to be negative with your hobby towards people. I can imagine Rivet counters getting a lot of backlash because of stuff that they've never said, never been involved with, or have never done. So it's that's something to be aware of. We should always be considerate of different people's perspectives of the hobby. We should all treat everyone with respect. I don't think I've ever gone on Facebook and had a rage at anyone or commented, mean stuff on their post or anything like that. But I would never post anything on Facebook myself. I mean, I post pictures of my layouts and stuff like that. But if I had a question, I don't think I'd ever go on Facebook. I think there's just too much. It's too easy to be too negative and for no one to ever know who you are. And I think
that's a very good point.
A topic will come on maybe in a future podcast, but it is kind of sad how something that has got so much potential for good can be so bad. It's so easy to make a fake Facebook account. It's
Exactly.
so easy, and just to go spam people. And I see that in some, like, I think it's like the Real Railway Photography group or something like that. Other groups, which just drain my time. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is always a minority, and the people who've probably had one or two instances, say 5 people who have had one or two instances, those instances have probably been from the same person.
Yeah.
Because it's just the sort of people they sometimes are. And I think whether it's an issue with over the monitor, you can't come across the way that you want to. Maybe they are just trying to be just offering a little bit of feedback, some constructive feedback, or whether it's actually being arse. I think there's an issue with that sometimes over the monitor, but obviously sometimes people are out just to make each other unhappy. And obviously, considering we're a minority within the hobby, and we are losing numbers on the whole, well, let's face it, the hobby's nowhere near as it once was. I think it's very important to promote the hobby's growth.
I don't think we should look back and be sad for what's happening. I think we should definitely look forward and see the potentials that we've got, and just changes in the hobby and how we shouldn't just look for the negatives. Definitely, look for positives. It is coming up to just over 20 minutes, so we should probably start wrapping this up.
Okay. So there's just kind of a couple last points that I think I just want to kind of almost like a bit of a legal thing. Obviously, we're both heavy believers in everybody should model what they want in the way they want, and that's part about developing as a modeler yourself, developing what you think your model should be. Luke referenced what the sort of modeler that he is. I did briefly mention the sort of modeler that I think I am, at least. So everybody is, obviously it's a hobby, and everybody is developing at their own rates, or just staying where they are because they're happy where they are.
The hobby,
and obviously that's the important thing.
Seriously, should it? It's a hobby.
Exactly.
I mean, some people's professions, they're far and few between. So it is a hobby. Everything should be taken lightly. You should do everything to enjoy yourself. If you're trying to make everything super accurate and you're not enjoying it, don't do it. Like, that's simple as, I should let you continue.
Yeah, and why not model austerity with outside cylinders, because it would have suited the National Coal Board. Go for it. Actually, no, that's not a project that I've been toying with at all. But anyway, that's about all I've got to say with regards to this podcast on Rivet counters and probably realism in general, really, within the hobby.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think we've covered it fairly well. I think, if I give one piece of advice, or if you take one thing away from this podcast, is Rivet counters aren't bad. I think we've kind of come to that the majority of Rivet counters aren't bad, and it's kind of a negative label forced upon that. They don't have any choice to say, well, I'm not a Rivet counter. People just have different interests in realism and how things should operate, how things they may want to operate stuff. So yeah, I think that's we've covered it pretty well. Yeah. Yeah.
And a couple of one last thing really with regard to the podcast itself. We've obviously got a Instagram page, Train Crash Pod. It'll be linked in the description along with our own channels and our own Instagrams. But please do feel free to drop us a message on there if there's anything you'd like to see us discuss or any modelling questions you'd like us to answer, possibly in a future podcast. So yeah, go follow us on there. Go subscribe to our normal channels. Follow us on our normal Instagrams. And also, please do feel free to subscribe to this channel. We are working hard to develop it and grow it.
Yeah, we've got some exciting plans this summer as well, haven't we? Maybe a competition of sort. We're gonna keep quiet about those because we're just working on a couple more ideas, and it'll keep this surprise definitely worth it. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening. We will hopefully be back soonish, sometime, something like that, with another podcast. All right. Stay safe. Bye.
See you in a bit.